Business as Unusual is a thought-provoking podcast that explores the innovative strategies, disruptive ideas, and unconventional practices driving successful leaders and companies in the ever-evolving world of modern business. Subscribe, comment, and share for weekly inspiration with our host, Aicila.
Welcome to Business as Unusual. Have you ever wondered what it takes to completely transform your career and build a wildly successful business on your own terms? Today, I'm delighted to welcome Tim Packer, a celebrated Canadian artist whose journey is truly unusual. Tim walked away from a stable career as a police detective to chase his lifelong dream, building a thriving multi-million-dollar art business that's helped thousands of artists grow. Tim works to demystify success in the art world, breaking down what actually works from mindset to marketing, to prove that the myth of you either have talent or you don't holds no power. So welcome to the show, Tim.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. And you obviously have a painting behind you for those of you who are not seeing this. And this is one of Tim's paintings. I was looking at your website earlier this morning, and I love the way the light, I think it's a light dusting, was one of the top ones. The sun just looks so amazing. I didn't know you could paint sun like that.
Yeah, that's kind of become my hallmark, is the sun coming through the trees.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So I sort of, the first question, and it may not be the best entry question, but I'm really curious how you feel being a detective helped you in your art career, because I expect there were some things that were really useful, but maybe not. So
no, it actually was. So when I left, I was a detective in the commercial crime unit, which is the fraud squad. So it involved doing a lot of meticulous research and really kind of putting together pieces of a puzzle. And when I decided to pursue my career as an artist again, I looked at it basically the same way. I just looked at it, okay, there are a lot of people who have done this, and what have they done? And so I was just voracious about learning everything I could learn about not only art, creating art, but the business of being an artist. Mm-hmm. And I started seeing these common patterns of, these are the things that successful people did, and these are the things that people who were struggling were doing. And I used that to kind of, for my own path. And that worked out well for me. And then the other thing that policing gave me was just showing up. That's the number one, the thing that separates those who are successful and those who aren't, is just showing up. And for artists, mm-hmm. It means showing up in front of your easel like every day to paint, whether you want to or not. And the police force was like, I don't think there's very many careers where it's that strict. Like, you would get docked 3 hours pay if you were 1 minute late on parade. And if it happened 3 times in a year, you got brought on Police Act charges. Mm-hmm. So it was just really ingrained that you show up doing what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to be doing it all the time. And I think for a lot of artists, that's a problem. There's this myth that, we're only going to paint when we're inspired. And one of my favorite quotes is from Chuck Close, probably one of my favorite artists of the 20th century, who he said, like, inspiration is for amateurs and dilettantes. Professionals mm-hmm. just get up and go to work every day. And so those two things have really, really helped me. And even as I've moved more now into like social media, my YouTube courses, and now my online courses and publishing my own work, that whole kind of background I had as a detective, which is kind of being able to investigate and find out what are all the things I need to learn and need to master, who and where do I go to get these, and then kind of putting a plan together to actually get you to your desired objective. And that's worked really well. And that's what I try to institute in my art academy and with my book, is putting together a plan for people that it's not magic,
Mm-hmm. It's not magic.
We all tend to think it is, mm-hmm. But there are definite things you can do, and there's a definite order to getting the best out of it too. Like, you don't teach trigonometry to grade 3 students, right? Because they're not ready yet. And so right. It's kind of the same thing with art. There's a logical progression of different skills and concepts to master in a logical order. And if you do that, you'll actually fast forward the process. So
that I do I feel like I've experienced that in a variety of places, that there is honestly a craft to most things.
Hmm.
And there's a difference between, like, I cook, I'm a functional cook, I'm a decent cook. My son is a chef.
Yeah.
He that is a very different thing. Like the things that he does to make sure he's creating the desired outcome, which is a specific flavor profile and look and experience for the person eating it. Whereas I'm going to make sure that you've got something that, will serve your biological needs and probably not taste so bad. And it's not going to be the same tomorrow as it was last week. Like, I'm just going to do it however. And both are fine, but I think understanding the difference, like if I was going to make that my career, I would have to move more into that mentality of it being a craft as opposed to I'm just getting it done today.
Oh, exactly. And with art, that's the problem because I liken it to golf. That there are millions of golfers out there that do this as a pastime, and some of them are very, very good, even just the amateurs and hobbyists. But there's a very different kind of dynamic between playing golf, where it's just your pastime, and playing on the PGA Tour. And there's very different things that are required to get there. The nice thing about golf is it comes with a score, right? So we're not able to delude ourselves that, I could go out and beat Rory McIlroy. The problem with painting is it doesn't come with a score. And so there are a lot of people that I would liken to, like even I have a friend of mine. He won the Ontario Senior Championship, and he competes in the Canadian Senior Championship. But he's an amateur, and this is still just a pastime for him that he pays to do. But he knows he's not good enough to actually go out and make a living as a golfer. The problem is in art, there's a lot of people who are 2 or 3 handicap painters or 15 handicap painters who think, they've read the thing from Malcolm Gladwell about the 10,000 hours. And it's kind of like, I hear that all the time from people. It's like, well, I've been painting my whole life, so I should be able to earn a living from this. And it's like, no, it's 10,000 hours dedicated towards improving your craft. It's not 10,000 hours of pushing paint around. I've golfed for over 10,000 hours. I'm still an 18 handicap, which I was when I was 16 years old, because I just enjoy going out and playing mediocre golf.
Yeah.
There's a lot of artists out there that enjoy painting mediocre paintings, and there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is when they then think that they can create a good living from painting just nice paintings, right? Because there's millions of artists out there creating nice paintings. And there's a whole other level that you need to get to if you want to actually create a good living from your art. And the thing about it that my mission kind of in life now is kind of spreading the word to those artists that it's possible to get there. Like, talent is not something you were given or not given. It's not some magical gift. It's simply the sum total of your skills, knowledge, creativity, and experience. And you can improve and increase all of these things. The problem is most artists, they work for a little bit of time to improve until they get nice work that the odd person might want to buy. And then they spend the rest of their career trying to create a business around that just moderately competent, nice work, rather than just staying in that mode of increasing your skills, pushing your creativity, really mastering the concepts till you can get to the point where you're creating work where people don't go, oh, gee, that's nice. They go, oh my God, I have to have that. And like, they just get out their wallets. And I've seen that. That's what happened to me. I actually gave up on the dream when I was 21 years old, because I'd worked as a graphic designer for 2 years, kind of doing entry level, kind of mind numbing work, got laid off 3 separate times in that 2-year period. And I saw people around me who were much more talented than I was. And I just thought, well, I don't have it. This is never going to happen. And the Toronto Police Force was hiring. And so I thought, well, it's time for a steady job, a paycheck and a pension. And it wasn't until I was in my 30s that I really was first exposed to the idea of the growth mindset, and that, your talent is not fixed. Your talent is simply the sum total of all of these things. And I didn't want to believe it, which is kind of crazy. And I didn't want to believe it because I thought if this was true, then I'd given up on the dream of the thing I loved to do a job that I liked. and
Mhm.
that I was good at. And I didn't want to believe that I'd made that big of a mistake in kind of my life plan. But then a little voice in the back of my head just kept saying, well, what if they're right? What if this is possible? And so I just decided I'm going to live my life for a year as though I believe in this whole growth mindset thing. And one of the things I realized about it is, again, that whole idea of identifying what are the skills or the knowledge or the concepts that I'm really deficient in right now, that if I mastered them, that would have a huge impact in everything I do going forward. And so identified for me that it was composition. I knew composition was a thing, but I probably had the least amount just of intuitive sense of composition of anyone I ever met in terms of the way that we arrange things. And which is really weird because now that's kind of my thing. That's what I'm known for, is being a master of composition and being able to teach it. But I think the reason I teach it so well is I was totally clueless when I started out.
Mhm.
But I also realized that I needed to be consistent, right? That whole idea of almost like working out, you can go to the gym once every 3 months and work out for 8 hours. It's just going to be painful and not going to
Yeah.
give you any results. But if you go 3 times a week for half an hour, at the end of the year, the results would be amazing. So I started doing that. I started scheduling my painting time first, almost like it was a work session, and then scheduling the rest of my life around that. And within a year, it was amazing. Like, I had gotten into a couple juried shows, I'd won an award, I'd sold some paintings. My work had improved incredibly, and I was just hooked. And then within 3 years, my wife went from saying to me at one point, I'm really proud of all this success you're having as an artist, but please don't ever come to me and tell me you want to quit your job full time. And that was at the end of that first year. And then 2 years later, she actually said to me, I just had a show that was very successful. I'd been elected to a couple of national arts organizations. I had a pile of commissions lined up to do. And my wife said to me, I think we need to talk, not about if you leave the police force to paint full time, but when you leave.
Oh, that's lovely.
And you could have knocked me over with a feather when she said that. And so that was in the fall of 1999. So we thought, well, with the new millennium coming, that was perfect timing. So I went home for Christmas vacation at the end of 1999, and at the end of my holidays was my effective resignation date. So, and that's the scariest thing I've ever done in my life. And people ask me on the police force, what's the scariest thing you ever did? It's like quitting my job and walking away from my pension with a 7 and 5-year-old at home and trying to make a living as an artist. But it turns out to be one of the best decisions I ever made.
Yeah. Well, and you had like some external indications that it was an option, which I do think is important. I definitely strongly believe that we are more fulfilled when we're doing those things that we're passionate about. And I also recognize there's a pragmatic side to life. No matter how much you love what you're doing, if you cannot meet your other obligations or your basic human needs, that's gonna tear the dream down a little bit. So you have to find that balance between passion and pragmatism. And I love that you were able to do that. I think that's and to see the ways in which your effort, because I do think that's the other part. People will have a dream and they're like, oh, it's going to all work out. Very magical thinking. And it is magical, but part of the magic is the work.
And that whole idea that you just touched on, I mean, I love Simon Sinek talks about the infinite game, right? And that being an artist is an infinite game. The whole reason why I believe someone would want to become a full-time professional artist is you love painting more than anything else, and you want to be able to get up every day and do that. And there's like 3 options, right? You could win the Powerball, you could marry a wealthy spouse who's very supportive, or you can actually figure out a way to earn a decent living from doing what you do. But one of the most important things is that, again, that whole idea of the infinite game, the only reason we play is so that we can keep on playing. And that idea that you never make a decision that could take you out of the game if it doesn't work out. And so for me, I didn't just decide one day I'm going to quit the police force and do this. I'd had about 4 years of really dedicated effort where things were happening. And like I say, I'd gotten the feedback, I'd gotten sales. But even then, it wasn't like, well, let's just cross our fingers and hope. Like I actually set myself up to work for the last few years in the commercial crime unit. Because that was I got the month-long computer crime course at the RCMP college with the Mounties. And so like I had a skill set that was very, very in demand in the private sector, in the corporate world. We were losing probably 4 or 5 detectives a year that were doing what I did, quitting and cashing in their pension, but not to paint. They were going to big corporations to head up their corporate security. So I knew that if this art thing didn't work out, I wasn't going to starve. I could get another job. And my wife also had a very good job. So yeah, I don't recommend anybody put their house or their family's livelihood at risk or whatever to kind of chase this dream. It's like test. I'm a big believer. You test first in small ways, and then based on feedback, you kind of inch your way along. So when I made the decision to quit the police force, we had pretty strong indicators that, okay, that not only would I be able to figure this out, but that I was already partway there. And I also had the motivation, that whole thing I mentioned earlier too, about having a supportive spouse. That can be a good thing, but it can be a bit of a curse, because just kind of blind support kind of kills that kind of enthusiasm and the need to succeed, right? I believe there's a big motivator for me is the fear of failure and not wanting to fail and putting myself on the hook. And so when my wife and I had that conversation, it was also followed by, she said, this isn't just because I support you and want you to be fulfilled. She said, this is because I think this might be in our family's best long-term economic interest. And as long as that's a possibility, I'm going to support this. But you need to tell me now, like before you quit, that if it ever becomes clear this isn't in our best interest, you'll put on a suit and get a job in corporate security. So I always had that in the back of my mind, that this was not just about me finding my flow state and creating work that I loved. It was to find a way that I actually could create a good living from my art. And I think that was one of the big motivators that really pushed me, that led to my success.
Yeah, I think that's wise to recognize that whole picture, and obviously to understand yourself and what motivates you in that way. Do you have an example of a tip that you offer to an artist that you could sort of demonstrate in this moment, something that people could relate to?
Yeah, so if someone's really serious about their art, and whether it's just as a hobby that, they want to just, get as good as they can get at, or whether they want to participate in, one art festival a year or whatever, or if they actually have the same dream that I had, which is to make a living from your art, the number one thing I can tell people is you have to paint 3 times a week, because learning is cumulative. And I see all kinds of people, they go in spurts. They won't paint for 6 months, and then they'll take a workshop, and then they'll paint for that weekend, and then they won't paint again for 3 months. And again, it's just like going to the gym, because what happens is while you're immersed in that, you're actually learning and improving. But then you go even a week, 2 weeks without painting, and the rust starts to build up. And all of a sudden, you come back to paint again. Now you've got to work to get yourself back to where you were when you went on that, that 3-day painting workshop. It might take you 2 or 3 days to get back there. Whereas if you're painting 3 times a week, even if it's only for an hour and a half, 2 hours, every time you're coming to sit down and at your easel or stand at your easel and paint, you're still fresh from your last session. So you just continually improve. And then the other thing is, if at all possible, if you can have a place set up where your work is there ready, and you don't need, most of us start on the kitchen table, right? And so, or the dining room table. And that means at like 5 o'clock, okay, it's time to put all your stuff away because dinner's coming. But if you have to spend a half an hour setting up and a half an hour cleaning up after every time you go to paint, then you're not even going to do it unless you've got 4 or 5 hours. Whereas if you can have a small corner of a room where you have your stuff set up, you can you can sit down and paint in an hour and a half now becomes valuable time to paint in. So I think the whole thing of painting 3 times a week and having a place set up where you can just come and sit down and get to work, that's huge, because showing up is, I think Woody Allen said that's, 80% of the secret of success is just showing up when you're supposed to show up. So that's one thing I would say.
That's really great advice or great tips. So you've changed a little bit. Obviously, you're financially successful. You get to paint. You paint beautiful things, and now you also teach artists. Is that the next phase? What does success look like for you at this point? Because it seems like you've achieved a lot of the things you set out to achieve.
Yeah, I became way more successful as an artist than I ever dreamed of. I mean, my goal was to, if I could ever make the same amount of money that I would have made on pension, then I would have been happy. But it went, do you want me to tell? It's a bit of a complicated story of, not complicated, but the journey. So it kind of started with, so I left the police force in 2000. In 2015, I was having a show at a very upscale gallery in Toronto. And it was like the movie version of an artist having a show. So the gallery, it was right down in Yorkdale, which is like the glitzy area in downtown Toronto with all the high-end shops. And the gallery closed at 5:00, but was reopening at 7 for my solo show. So at 5:00, I was there at the gallery, and I set up an easel in the front window of the gallery. So I was there painting in the front of the gallery, waiting for the show to open. And like around 6:30, people started lining up. And by 7:00, there was a lineup down the street, and the doors opened. People came in. There was someone playing live music. There was waiters walking around with trays of wine, and the red dots were going up as paintings sold. And I was just kind of like, and I'm thinking, I'm just some dumb copper who,
right.
How did this happen to me? And I realized, and it had already been a very good year. And I realized, as I was kind of just mentally calculating this, like I was going to make over $250,000 that year from the sale of my art. And I was just like blown away. And, but what was really funny is the whole kind of basking in the glow didn't last very long. And I had this other feeling kind of descend on me. And at first I thought, do I feel guilty? Like I shouldn't feel guilty. But what I realized what it was I had a feeling of responsibility, because I know there are so many people out there that is their dream, right? That if they could have any wish in the world, it would be to have that kind of a career as an artist, to be able to spend their days doing that. And I know most of them would never achieve it. And not because they didn't want it bad enough, not because they didn't have the work ethic. It's they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to get there. Mm-hmm. And so that night, I actually just decided I'm going to pay it forward, and I'm going to start teaching what I know, how I got here, because I knew I wasn't special. I just figured out the things I needed to do, and I realized, well, that's YouTube, I guess. Now, unfortunately, this was before smartphones, so I went down to Vistech, which is like one of the top huge photography stores in Toronto, and I dropped about $25,000 in video equipment, sound equipment, everything else. And I started doing my YouTube channel, right? And it was purely just a kind of an investment in karma and just giving back to the art world that had kind of given so much to me. And it was all just videos trying to help artists who had that same dream. But then the one thing that I found was that, you think if you put it out there, they will come. It's like, no. So, and anyways, I did continue on the YouTube thing, but it was only, like a passion project on the side. I did it in kind of the spare time that I had. And at that, like, it was all a one-man band. No, I did all the editing, everything. And then I had the opportunity in 2017, a good friend of mine that I golfed with, his daughter had, she was a landscape architect. She just graduated university, and she'd gotten to know me for the last couple of years. She was in school, and I knew that she had a passion for art. And anyways, I was golfing with her dad, and he said, "Oh, we talked with Brooke last night." And I said, "Well, how is she?" He said, "Well, I can tell you one thing, she doesn't want to be a landscape architect. She wants to be an artist.
Mhm.
And he was not happy. And if, if the thought bubble over his head would be, and it's all your fault. Um, and because every time we did a couple small print jobs for her, she had kind of taken her art to a bit of a side hustle while she was in university. And so I said to him, and I knew that she had the drive. Like every time we were together, we met socially sometimes, or even at golf. She golfed with me and her dad. She was always just picking my brains about art, and I knew that she had pretty good skill set, but she had that real burning desire, and she'd already shown some really good business sense. And so I said to her dad, I said, listen, she's living at home now. She has no debt. This is the perfect time for her to do this. If it doesn't work out, she could go back and do her job in landscape architecture. And then I just said, it just came to me. I said, listen, I'd be willing to mentor her if she wants, as long as she's willing to have all of our sessions filmed on YouTube and to post so that other people could learn from them. So we started doing that. And thank God we filmed the sessions. So her name's Brooke Cormier. She is in terms of artists on social media, she's a superstar. She's living in Vienna right now. She's got over 1 million followers on social media. Her very first year, she made over $30,000 from her art. And by that second year, we were doing self-publishing prints of her work. Her work was being sold around the world. And she's just gone on to amazing success. Her work now often sells for more than mine. And that really, really convinced me, okay, I guess I know what I'm talking about here, right? And that I can help people. But I was still just doing the YouTube thing part-time. And then in 2019, I had really, really bad thyroid issues. I had Graves' disease and almost died twice. It was lying on the gurney, kind of my wife and I not knowing if I was going to be here in 15 minutes. And then for that whole year, I was sick. And so, there's a thing called mortality motivation that, when you almost die, then you don't think about, gee, what am I going to post on Instagram tomorrow? You're thinking about, okay, is what I'm doing really what I want to be doing with my life? And the one thing that was great about one thing I highly recommend is in the near-death experience, as long as you come out about okay, is that while I was lying there both times, I was worried for my wife and boys, but I knew they would be fine. Financially, we were secure, and I knew that was going to be hard on them. But I just had this overwhelming feeling of gratitude. It was well, if this is it, I was so calm. It was if this is it, thank you, because this has been everything I could have hoped for and more. I'm not ready to go yet, but if it is, I had more kicks at the happiness can than most people I know. I'd gotten to fulfill all of my dreams. And that feeling, knowing that, that you feel that way about your life, is something I talk about people. It's what people should be afraid of, more than anything else is people are afraid of failure. They're afraid of public speaking. They're afraid. What they should be afraid of is reaching that moment in their life and having nothing but regrets that I wish I would have. The feeling of just knowing that, that I felt that way. But over that year, I realized I did have one regret. And that was that I had still just treated the teaching as kind of a side hustle, passion project. Just my main focus was still just on creating work and making lots of money from my art. And I kind of decided during that year, I had a talk with my wife, and I and said, if I get healthy, I really want to switch things up. I'll still paint. That will be in my spare time, but I want to direct most of my efforts towards teaching. And of course, her being an ex-banker was well, that's fine as long as you can turn it into a successful business. Because even though we're doing well and we're fine, like I say, she's you're not ready to quit yet. And we could live, but not the lifestyle we want. And so then I started really investigating into. I knew I wasn't going to be teaching in person because I couldn't justify that because they couldn't pay me what it would be worth to give up painting to do this. And then COVID happened and everybody became comfortable with this, what we're doing right now, right?
Yeah.
If people wanted to
It
talk
really
to their
changed
grandkids.
things.
And all of a sudden, it just opened up the whole idea of remote learning and realizing that online learning now is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And then I felt really bad. I still had this kind of feeling that, I don't want to be one of those people who makes my money off the back of starving artists, right? I want to make my money off my rich clients. And then I actually ended up talking to some people who were in the teaching space, and they were saying, you're being very selfish here. And it's like, that makes you feel noble. I get it. But two things. If you're only giving what you can give part-time to it, you're not helping people as much as you could. But also the fact that people don't value stuff that they don't pay for. There's all kinds of studies say that if people take free courses, they often don't finish them and they don't implement them. Whereas if people pay for a course, they are much more likely of finishing it, and they're much more likely of actually implementing the stuff if they've invested in it. Once they've put themselves on the hook to actually take it, they're more likely to carry it through and implement the things that were taught. And so when I saw that, I thought, you know what? Yeah, this is perfect. So that's in 2020, we founded the Tim Packer Art Academy. And we just crossed $500,000 in sales of my courses this summer. And yeah, that's now my life. So for success for me now is just kind of keep doing what I'm doing. I spend most of my time working with the Art Academy and with the students. And then in my spare time, I get to paint.
It's lovely. Well, and I've known of many people that went to school for art, and the two things that I've seen, and also people who do something artistic in their life or as their livelihood. And one, most people that go to school for art have expressed a regret / awareness moment that while they learned a lot of techniques, there was absolutely zero information on business, how to understand business, how to build business, how to understand yourself in your financial situation. And the other thing that I see frequently is this almost, I don't want to say disgust, but like a weird relationship with money, like that somehow being successful artistically and successful financially aren't allowed to go together. The real art comes from suffering, right? And so I can see where, especially your friends who teach, would find that what you're doing is really valuable, because it kind of confronts both of those embedded mindsets and behaviors that are, from what I can understand, fairly consistent across whatever the discipline is, honestly.
Yeah, so you touched on a few things there that are really important. And one is that the whole idea too, like right now, in my opinion, the art programs in universities and colleges, it's broken.
Yeah.
For a couple of reasons. First of all, there's a whole idea that there's a bunch of different art villages. There's not one art world. And the village that gets most of the attention is the village of publicly funded galleries and institutions, where it's all about postmodernism, and it's all about what the artist felt, and it's all about conceptual work, which is fine. That's a village. And that's a village that a lot of the universities and colleges focus on, to the exclusion of everything else. But then there's another village, which is the village of commercial sales, which is actually, I think most people, when they're young and think about being an artist, that's actually what they wanted. They want to be able to go into their studio and create work that exhibits mastery and skill and conceptual knowledge, and create works of great beauty that people actually pay to hang in their homes, right? Or to hang in their businesses or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's not what's being taught for the most part in universities. And even when it is, even if you can find some university programs that have the old atelier style of teaching that does teach that, then we get into a thing called debt. The art programs are some of the most expensive out there. And what ends up happening is students graduate from university with like 50 or 100,000 or even more in debt. When they come out of school, they then are in a situation, well, okay, now I'm going to have time to explore my art and maybe do the odd art festival. They need to get a job, any job, to start getting out from under this debt. And that doesn't leave an awful lot of time for them to pursue their art. And what ends up happening, because I have a lot of these people in my program now, they just never reached the point where they were able to say, okay, now I can focus on creating my art and trying to create a business of my art, because they've got to get a job at a bank or insurance company or whatever to pay off their debt. And we are in the golden age of learning now. You can learn anything on the internet, whether it's free courses like on YouTube, whether it's books, magazines, whether it's paid online courses. And art is it's one of those things. It's like 3% learning and then 97% doing. That you don't need to be in a classroom. Even when I was in graphic design, I mean, our instructors would come in, they'd talk for 5 minutes, and then we'd go and spend the rest of the time creating, right? And so now you can take that money that you would spend towards an art education and kind of between online learning, and then if you're going to learn in person, here's the thing that, I mean, again, nothing against university art professors, whatever, but most of them could not survive on their art if they had to. Most of them haven't sold a painting in 10 or 20 or 30 years. But the most successful artists in the world, in my village, the village where people pay $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 for their paintings, most of them feel like I do about that whole idea of wanting to give back. And so most of them teach several workshops a year. So there's places like the Scottsdale Artist School or the Art Students League in New York. There you can go and learn from artists who are actually out there at the top of their game, where people line up to buy their work, and you're learning from those people rather than just in a university system where you're learning from someone who's probably teaching what was taught to them 25 or 30 years ago, because it's just a product of the university system that kind of comes out and then becomes a university professor. Whereas in either online or in these other things, you can deal with people who are actually making a living from their art now.
Yeah. What advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
For my 18-year-old self, I would say that my ultimate talent was virtually unlimited, and only limited by how hard I was willing to work, and to not compare myself against other people right now. Because yes, there are going to be people who are more talented than you. And yes, you're not talented enough to make a living as an artist yet. And yet is one of the most powerful words in the English language. I think that we can overcome any of the criticisms we say to ourselves or the self-limiting thoughts. If you put a yet on the end of it, then it's true, because you can learn how to do the things. You can work to master the skills, master the concepts, whatever. So that would have been my advice, and to just not give up, but also the other thing I would have said too is find the dominoes, find the things where, what's the one thing right now that if you were to focus on mastering, that would have the biggest impact on everything going forward. And then it's just rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat for the rest of your life. And if you do that, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, that's great advice. So for folks that are listening, how do they learn more, follow you, get in touch?
Okay, they can, if they're interested in taking courses with me, they can go to www.timpackerartacademy.com. So we have a number of different courses there. Some of them are just like recorded courses. And then I have an online community, the Hungry Artist Community. It's a subscription-based program. And in there, you get all my courses, but I meet every week. We do a live Zoom call where I'll offer coaching advice, answer questions, and critique artists' work. And then if you're just looking to find some stuff for free, my YouTube channel is at Tim Packer Fine Arts. I have several hundred videos on my YouTube channel. I still put out a free YouTube video every week, and there's a ton of information there. And you can also watch that young artist that I talked about, Brooke Cormier. If there's artists here listening, some of them probably already know her, but you can see her entire progress from the very first session we had right up until her having her first show at my gallery, and then basically taking the world by storm.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing a little bit about what you're up to with my listeners. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. It's been my pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed Tim's journey as much as I did. If you are feeling ready to transform your creative dream, head to Tim's website to get started. Next week, listen in as I chat with family law expert Perdita Jafari. She shares her unconventional, effective, empathy-driven approach to divorce, mediation, and navigating narcissistic abuse. Thank you for tuning into Business as Unusual. Remember, in this ever-evolving world of modern business, it's not about fitting in, it's about standing out. See you next time. Stay curious, stay innovative, and always keep it unusual. I hope you enjoy the show. I love making it. If you did enjoy it, consider hopping over to the review portion of the platform you listen on and letting other people know about it. Or share the episode or the entire show with a friend or subscribe to the show. Definitely reach out, get on my newsletter, follow me on social media, and let me know what you like, what you don't like, and what you'd like to see in the future. Well, we love our guests. Appearance on the Business as Unusual podcast or any Bicurean consulting production is for information purposes only and is not to be considered an endorsement of their business practices, or character. Please properly vet anyone you find through this podcast and generally before you do any business with them. Thank you for listening.